Hey stragglers and tourists, my name is the TheiPadCat and welcome to the 4th episode of my The Last of Us Could Have Been Very Different series, where we reconstruct and discuss one of the original The Last of Us storyboards from the game's development. If you just came across this video, I would strongly recommend that you watch this series in chronological order because otherwise it probably won't make much sense. In this episode, we're just getting to the spring season and we'll meet quite an unpleasant group. But let's not delay any further.
Let's get on with it.
After a few weeks in Boston, and many long stops due to lack of gas, Bill, Joel and Ellie approached Pittsburgh. According to their maps, they should just be able to stay on the freeway and pass the city to continue west. Ellie woke up from a nap in the backseat and jokingly asked if they were there yet. Joel and Bill didn't seem amused. The closer they got to the city limits, the more cars were littering the road. Bill pointed out that it would be a problem if they got any more frequent. Like the small town back near Boston, this freeway was like a moment paused in time, but not nearly as tranquil. Rusted and overgrown, some burnt out and deformed from crashes and accidents, there were cars on every lane on both sides of the road, serving as monuments and reminders of the chaos that ensued in the days following CBI reaching critical mass. It reminded Joel of that day and what he'd lost. It wasn't long until the amount of cars were really starting to drastically affect the speed they were able to drive at, having to zigzag between the wrecks until they finally reached what was once an exit leading into the city, where cars were almost piled on top of each other. There was no way they were driving past that. Ellie asked if they should continue on foot, to which Bill mockingly responded by asking if she wanted to get there before the end of the year. Letting out a sigh, Joel eventually turned right toward the streets of Pittsburgh.
Screw it.
But after just driving down the street for a minute, a man walked out into the middle of it, clenching his stomach, begging for help.
Please!
Holy shit.
Help!
Confused, Ellie asked if they should help him, but Joel just told her to fasten her seatbelt.
Are we gonna help him?
Put your seatbelt on, Ellie.
Bill turned around and grabbed his shotgun from the backseat as Joel accelerated as hard as he could. The man, realizing Joel didn't fall for the ruse, immediately dropped the act and pulled his gun out to fire, but was hit by the car before he could manage to. Dozens of armed people came out of their hiding places from behind cars, out of alleyways and windows. They threw bricks and fired their guns at them. Miraculously, most of it missed. But when familiar military trucks appeared behind them to close off the road, Joel realized that they weren't missing by accident. A few of the men up ahead pushed a bus down from a higher elevated street, and there was nowhere near enough time to avoid it. It hit the back of the car, throwing it off the side of the road into an old supermarket. After having blacked out for a short while after the crash, Joel woke up and quickly realized they were living on borrowed time. He yelled for Ellie and Bill to grab their stuff and get out of the car. Out on the street, the sounds of sinister voices and laughter from what he now knew was a group of hunters echoed. But it wasn't just hunters. Somehow Tess and her henchmen had got there before them. It was their trucks blocking the exit now that he thought about it. The three hid behind a counter awaiting the hunters to storm their position, but nothing came. A few moments later they heard what Joel feared. Tess's voice. She said that she didn't care about what the hunters did or took, as long as they left the old man. A moment later, all hell broke loose as a hunter wearing a red jacket and a gas mask rushed in and threw a Molotov cocktail in their general direction. But fortunately hit the car instead. With the gas tank leaking, it was only a question of time before an explosion occurred. Not being able to go out the way they came in, the three were forced to go further back into the store. Bill jokingly said something about running out of store as they got closer to the wall. Joel barked at them both to look around for another way out. Outside, the hunters were getting restless, angrily asking what the fuck they were waiting for. All of a sudden, the pushed back trio heard a man's voice from the end of the store, telling them to get over there. Joel, not really sure what to think, told Ellie to quickly go check it out. A few moments later she gave him a signal, saying it was alright. Bill and Joel got up, out of cover, and made their way toward where Ellie had gone. But when they were almost there, a gunshot went off. Bill moaned in pain, but seemed to be able to keep going. Glancing backwards, Joel could make out the silhouette of Tess through the smoke walking toward him, but not seeing him. It was getting really hard to breathe through the smoke now, but he got to where Ellie had signaled them from. There was a door leading to the back alleyway. It was slightly open, but she was nowhere to be seen. She had to have gone out already, Joel thought as he rushed out. Upon exiting, he was immediately met by a fairly muscular man, what must have been his little brother and Ellie. Ellie quickly told him that this was Henry and Sam. Henry, the big brother, told him that it was nice to meet them, but that now was not the time for pleasantries. He shoved an old iron pipe between the door and the handle, blocking it from opening, though that was not going to hold the hunters out for long. So they all made sure to put as much distance between them and the store as possible. A few minutes later they heard a distant explosion, which must have been the car. Henry showed everyone through a door to an old office building and they went in. They went up a range of stairs until they reached the 3rd story, where he told them to stop. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a keyring and proceeded to unlock a door. Jokingly he said they were welcome to enter his personal office.
Welcome to my office.
And they all went in. Joel quickly went to the far end of the office to check for any potential danger, and to his horror discovered that they were right on top of the hunter's main base. Doubting the safety of the place, he questioned Henry's choice of hideout, to which the man only responded that he had killed the previous hunter residents. Who wouldn't miss it? Not convinced but too tired to continue arguing, Joel sat down in an old fancy chair and asked Henry what their plan was. Henry proceeded to tell him that they were from a larger group of refugees from the former Hartford quarantine zone, and that they got separated on their way into this hellhole. He and his group were apparently supposed to meet at a barricaded abandoned church their scouts had previously found, located a few miles out of the city. Continuing the conversation, Joel asked how Henry could possibly think that they could get out of the city with all of the hunters being everywhere. Smiling slightly as if he were about to play a good hand in a card game, Henry walked up to the window and showed Joel what, according to him, was one of the only unobstructed ways into the old subway system, which supposedly had tunnels leading out of the city. And from what he'd gathered, it was guarded very lightly at night.
Look at these sons of bitches. Every day they congregate down there. Come nighttime, it's down to a skeleton crew.
Joel, not having a better idea, sighed and pointed out that they'd best get some sleep if they were to leave that night. What only felt like moments later to Joel, he woke up from Ellie telling him it was time.
He says it's time to go.
Much like in Boston a few weeks back, the eerie silhouettes of skyscrapers from another age towered over them, with only moonlight to illuminate them outside the window. After making their way down another set of stairs, Henry raised his hand to signal the group to stop. Up ahead was the gate to the Hunter base and the subway entrance. And like Henry had told them, the guard crew was minimal. After a patrolling guard had passed, Henry signaled Joel that they should go up ahead and take out the 2 hunters by a nearby fire barrel. Joel agreed and quietly turned around and told Bill to cover them. Making their way forward, Joel glanced at the old military checkpoint, now occupied by the hunters, and saw Tess and a few of her henchmen standing alongside them. If anyone could coax a bunch of savages into submission, it was probably Tess, Joel thought, which only reminded him that they needed to get out of there as soon as possible. He and Henry managed to neutralize the fire barrel hunters with ease and signaled the others to make their way to their position. Bill, Ellie, and Sam started slowly, crouched over to walk toward them. At first it seemed like it was going to work out, but somehow Sam managed to knock over a bunch of recently used beer bottles. The hunters reacted immediately, yelling for their friends by the fire barrel to go check it out. But when they didn't respond, they turned their searchlight to where they'd heard the noise. And at a moment's notice, the group went from concealed to sitting ducks. Henry yelled for everyone to take cover, and as Joel rushed in behind the wall, he could see the hunters, as well as Tess, jumping down from the checkpoint towers onto the street en masse. He pulled out his revolver and quickly got out of cover and fired a shot at them. One of the hunters dropped dead. He told everyone to keep firing to prevent them from getting any closer. It all rapidly turned into a stalemate and ammo quickly began to run short. Echoing between the buildings was the sinister voice of a hunter claiming he was going to smoke them out. Glancing out from his cover, Joel saw how a man wearing similar clothing to the hunter that threw the Molotov at them when they first entered the city, walking toward them. As he realized he was most likely going to throw one at them, and that neither of them could move out of cover, adrenaline began flowing through his veins, slowing down his perception of the situation to something resembling an old slow-mo scene in an action movie from before the outbreak. It turned out he was right in his fears about what the hunter was about to do, and could only watch as the Molotov flew gracefully through the air towards them. It hit the ground, narrowly missing Bill, who was hiding behind the counter, making him lose his footing and stumble out into plain sight. Tess, seeing her moment, presumably thinking it was Joel, got out of cover and raised her rifle and fired. Bill died immediately. Suddenly Joel found himself back in the real world on time. Their line was broken, meaning that they had to get out of there or they'd face the same fate as Bill. Henry shouted from his cover that they should make a run for it. Joel agreed and responded that Henry and the kids should go first while he covered them from behind. As the shooting stopped for a short time as the hunters reloaded their guns, he shouted, "Now!" His three companions began running. Shortly after, he got out of cover and fired all of his loaded rounds and then made his run for it. Just barely avoiding hunter fire, they all miraculously made it into the stairwell leading down into the subway. But horrified, they found out that the way forward was blocked by a locked, rusty metal gate. Henry yelled in a panicked voice that they should try to break through, so he and Joel began throwing themselves in unison onto the gate, and to their amazement, they managed to budge it just enough for a person to squeeze through. Henry pushed Sam forward and made him go through first, and then followed himself. But while pushing through the gap, Henry managed to budge the gate just a little more outward, which must have compromised the structural integrity of the roof because it came crashing down. Instinctively, Joel grabbed Ellie's arm and just managed to pull her out of the way of being crushed. Joel desperately asked for Henry to help him lift the pieces of concrete in the way of their way in, but realizing that the hunters would soon be upon them in numbers, Henry just grabbed Sam, said sorry and ran further into the subway.
I'm sorry. We're leaving.
What? What's this bullshit?
Banging his fist into the wall in anger, Joel almost missed Ellie whispering to him that he should come over to where she was. Turning to his right, he saw the collapse had led to the wall to a small sewer room breaking, in which Ellie was hiding. He quickly squeezed through, just as flashlight appeared at the top of the stairs. They could hear Tess curse, and some hunter chuckle and say something about letting the infected take them instead. Having just escaped certain death, Joel and Ellie took a moment to breathe. Joel muttered something about Henry before asking Ellie if she could see any way out of or into the subway. And she triumphantly responded that she did, and lit her flashlight to unveil a rusted out, overgrown emergency hatch leading into the subway tunnels. Not thinking about his subtle resentment of Ellie for a moment, Joel said she did a good job and began coaxing the hatch to open. After a lot of pushing, it finally gave in and they got into the tunnels. It smelled even worse than in the little sewer room, which they quickly discovered the reason for. The tunnels were mostly flooded, giving off a horrible stench. Ellie took the opportunity to remind Joel that she couldn't swim. Looking around for possible solutions, Joel saw that one of the old subway trains was still in the tunnel. Seeing it as well, Ellie asked if he couldn't boost her up on top of it. Not seeing any better way to go about it, Joel obliged. He told her to be careful and she rolled her eyes. Unlike the Boston subway tunnels Joel was so used to utilize as smuggling routes, this one was surprisingly intact. most likely due to less or no carpet bombings after the outbreak. And while that certainly made for a less obstructed way through it, it also meant practically no light. But that wasn't the only danger. The more enclosed and airtight, the better conditions for CBI spores and hives to flourish. And where there were spores, there were usually infected. As Ellie started walking forward on top of the old decrepit train car, Joel stepped down into the somewhat freezing water and began swimming. 1 or 2 miles of tunnels and abandoned trains later, they started seeing a vague light flickering off the walls up ahead in the otherwise pitch-black environment. Joel whispered for Ellie to stay where she was while he checked it out, but she refused and called this plan stupid and asked why she, who could move silently on top of a train, should stay behind while Joel swam, making sounds and ripples easily heard and seen. Annoyed, Joel sighed and looked down, about to say because he says no, but when he looked back at where Ellie was at, she was already gone. Swearing under his breath, he swam as discreetly but as fast as possible toward the light. Though after a few seconds he heard Ellie laughing and yelling to Joel it was okay. Confused, he continued swimming. When he was almost there, he heard more clearly who Ellie had found. Henry. Having left them for dead, he wasn't exactly pleased. He rounded a corner and saw Ellie, Henry and Sam sitting by a small campfire on some sort of old maintenance platform. As he climbed up and walked towards them, Henry burst out in an arguably fake welcome back speech, like a car salesman before the outbreak, assuming that everything was just good.
Okay.
See? What'd I tell you, huh? He's good. Everything's fine.
But Joel pushed him down and drew his gun. Surprised, Ellie asked what the hell he was doing. Joel growled back that he had left them for dead.
He left us to die out there.
Henry, dropping the act, said that he had to, and asked if Joel would have gone back for him and Sam.
You had a good chance of making it, and you did. But coming back for you meant putting him at risk. If it was the other way around, would you have come back for us?
Realizing that he probably wouldn't have, he lowered his gun, but didn't let go of his grudge. Reunited, the group rested for a few hours by the campfire until finally deciding to move on. When Joel was about to go jump in the water again, Henry said that they'd found a better way. At the end of the little platform there was a door leading into a separate tunnel, which Henry figured should lead to the surface, so they could avoid being trapped down in the tunnels if anything were to happen. Too proud to say anything but seeing the point anyways, Joel silently agreed. Unsurprisingly, having been untouched in a flooded and humid tunnel for 20 years, the door had rusted shut. And it was going to take a lot of force to get it open. After a few minutes of pounding at it with pipes, bricks, and sheer body weight, it finally gave in. But, like a collective déjà vu, the structure began cracking, and it was clearly going to collapse any second, blocking any attempt to get through. This time, though, the entire group made it through. Unfortunately, there were no stairs leading to the surface. Instead, they just found themselves in an even smaller, partially flooded maintenance tunnel. Turning on their flashlights, the light revealed that they would probably not be alone for much longer. A few meters ahead was a spore cloud emanating from around the corner in the tunnel, meaning the next room would most likely be filled with, and home to, multiple infected. Joel, Henry, and Sam quickly put their masks on, and they all continued on sneaking. Entering the next room, they could see the silhouettes of deformed creatures, twitching and clicking. With visibility being so low, they tried to avoid any confrontation with the infected. But Joel knew that was just wishful thinking. Any misstep or slightest sound would bring every single clicker onto their tail. And he was right. Not seeing it in the dark, he knocked over a couple of old rotting planks, leaning against the wall. Everyone started running. Joel rushed ahead, Ellie behind him, and then Sam and Henry. Quickly jumping over debris and trash and crawling under partially collapsed ceilings, the group ran for their lives, on the gamble that there would be an exit at the end. After a few minutes of running, feeling like hours, Joel could make out what seemed to be a door or a hatch of some kind. He ran up to it, optimistically trying the handle, but it didn't budge. This was different from the other ones, though. Above it, there seemed to be some sort of ventilation hatch. It was moving back and forth in the wind, and was letting in some early sunlight. He told Ellie to get in front of him. This time though, she didn't argue and he boosted her up, and she was able to safely crawl out to the outside. Henry and Sam had slightly fallen behind and just now caught up. Seeing Ellie crawl out, Henry grabbed Sam's arm to get him out too. But having slowed down at the end of the tunnel, the infected had in turn caught up to them, and the runner managed to get a hold of Sam's leg and pulled him back, making him fall. Like a primate, the runner started pounding his arms on his back, Sam screaming in pain. Henry desperately tried to pull the creature off, until a gunshot went off, and the runner fell lifeless on top of Sam. Confused, Joel looked around, and there was Ellie, holding Joel's revolver. She'd managed to get the door open and grab the gun out of his holster. Joel angrily took it back from her, mumbling that she could have killed someone, and pushed the door open a little further to make way for Henry carrying Sam. The sounds of tens of clickers closing in was harrowing. Upon exiting the tunnel out into the open, Ellie and Joel pushed the soda machine that had previously blocked the entrance back in place. Taking a breath, Joel heard Ellie chuckle disappointedly and say thanks for the warning on the other side.
Oh, are you fucking kidding me? Thanks for the warning on the other side, guys.
Joel looked at the wall of the tunnel and read the crudely written text. It read, "Infected inside, do not enter." Henry was facing the other way and pointed out that maybe they could rest and let Sam heal over there. Joel turned around and saw an old rural train station, with a cargo train still standing by the platform. Joel agreed and said that they could use the old cargo cars as shelter, and the group started to make their way there. Whew, that was a long segment. I know that last post-it said city's train station, which probably doesn't mean a rural train station. I mean, it literally means the opposite, but I just can't make it fit into the story. Especially since the very next post-it says rural countryside. First, they're escaping the city through a train tunnel, going out, but then they get out and go to the Pittsburgh city train station? I can't make sense of it. But, just wanted to let you know that. Anyways, what's funny is even though that this was so long, there isn't really a lot to discuss here. The timeline on the storyboard only really has a few post-its, and it's really short. And the way I interpret it, at least, it's quite similar to the Pittsburgh sequence in the actual game. There are a few key differences though. This takes place during spring instead of summer, of course. The end destination they're going to is an old church instead of a radio tower, and well, of course the Tess villain plot continues. I know I mentioned this before, but what's weird to me is how they originally meant to kill off practically every supporting character. This time it was of course Bill, which by the way must have originally had a completely different personality than the Bill we all know and love. In The Last of Us, Bill and Joel weren't really friends. They were merely associates, and Bill happened to have a strong enough sense of honor to repay the favors he once got from Joel. And well, then they get into some sticky situations that force them to be allies. But we see what happens as soon as the deal and the danger is up. Bill was never a philanthropist or someone who just help or give anyone something out of the goodness of his heart. Hence why he says,
"So you know what I did? I wisened the fuck up. And I realized it's gotta be just me."
So the fact that he supposedly just came with Joel and Ellie to Pittsburgh and then maybe even dying for them, that is very out of character for him. Which is why I forced him into it when I wrote my pretty bad version of it. But it could totally be that Naughty Dog originally just had a very different vision for his character, personality-wise. Also, overall, I've noticed, not just for this part but the entirety of the storyboard, that there is very little mention of and focus on the infected. I mean, neither the fact that Ellie is bitten nor that she is immune is actually mentioned even once on the entire board. So that, along with the weird thing about the CBI infecting a guy in an open street, immediately in the prologue, suggests to me that this is from pretty early on when Naughty Dog hadn't really nailed down CBI or even decided its inclusion overall. We know from the Grounded documentary that they originally just wanted to experiment with how people would react to living in a post-catastrophe world. but that it was decided that they needed infected for gameplay reasons, which they of course also incorporated into the story. But that is unfortunately all we have time for today. Do you agree or disagree with my discussion points? How old do you think this storyboard is? And what do you make of the drastically different Bill we have in this version of the game? Tell me in the comments down below and let's discuss it. Before I go, I'd also like to thank Tranners for helping me edit some minor things in the script for this episode. And until next time, have a great day.